Hi there, this is the Guitar Speak podcast. My name's Matt Wakeling. Thank you so much for joining me. Now today, episode 57, we speak to Joe Branton from the UK band Polymath. Now, Polymath hail from the south of the UK in the beautiful seaside town of Brighton. And Joe, alongside his bandmates Tim Walters and Chris Wilson, love to weld intricate prog and math rock with the visceral force of punk. Joe's bass playing embraces the shits with a variety of meaty tones, techniques and nuance. We talk about his development as a bass player, his current rig, right through to the soon-to-be-released Polymath double album House of Wisdom. We also get the lowdown on Polymath's feature in Boss's worldwide video for the release of the MS3 Switcher multi-effects. Joe's a co-host on the Guitar Nerds podcast, which is where I first heard about Joe and then joined the dots to find out about Polymath. All the tunes you hear throughout this episode are from the 2015 EP Reptiles. Alright, here's my conversation with Joe. Joe Branton, welcome to the Guitar Speak podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you, man. Really good. It's exciting news for you for Polymath. I just read your crowdfunding project for your new album has just been reached in the dying moments.
Yeah, that's right. By the skin of our teeth, we made it through the pledge campaign. We may have. So I think the problem that we ran into there is we gave ourselves half the time that most other sort of our peers give themselves for pledges, and
Okay.
and I assume we were trying to raise a similar amount of money. It's sort of a popular thing to do in kind of the math rock community. Like loads of bands do it, and it's something that a lot of the supporters and fans get on board with, which is quite nice.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it seems like a really good community in Europe for that prog math post rock kind of scene.
Yeah, definitely is. Yeah, it's a really nice, really tight knit sort of thing, and I think it's all because there are a number of festivals. There's a festival there's a festival called Dunk in Belgium, and there's Arctangent in Bristol in the UK that just that bring all those bands together, and so it's very much like a family. All the bands all know each other. There are Facebook groups where everyone talks, and we all take it in turns to go on tours with each other. Sort of like a nice sort of group of maybe 30, 40 bands that all know each other, and it just makes being a part of the scene loads better because it's so much like that.
Yeah, that's cool. That's heaps cool. So yeah, I definitely want to get into lots of Polymath talk with you. But I'm just wondering if we could go back a little bit earlier. What was the inspiration for you to actually start playing bass in the first place?
Well, I imagine quite similarly to most people, it was, it's when you're at school and you realise that you like music. I think for me, I grew up in Watford, which is just a little a sort of an overspill town just outside of North London, and it's still now has a really vibrant punk rock scene. There's loads of kind of important UK punk bands seem to come out of Watford. Like at the moment, the Hell are probably the most relevant punk band coming out of there. But it's always had sort of a really strong and decent scene. And so I think as soon as I got into that and realised I wanted to be a part of that, you try and start a band at school, and everyone you know is a guitarist, and it was my idea to start a band. So I thought, well, I'll take the hit and be, not that it was a hit, but I'll because everyone has a guitar or has access to a guitar.
Sure.
And the only person that's actually got to buy anything really is the bass player, because no one has a bass amp and no one has a bass guitar. So I decided to be that fella. But that was cool. I sort of, for my sins, I think the first like proper record, whilst I feel my music taste went up from this point, my first record that I bought that made me realise that I was into music was Dude Ranch by Blink-182.
Okay.
And
yep.
So I was quite happy to be Mark Hoppus at that point. So
Excellent. I remember that album well. I'm probably a bit older than you, but I was doing a lot of guitar teaching when those Blink albums came out, and I was teaching lots of kids bass and guitar tunes off Dude Ranch and the following records. So yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's right. An ultimate sort of time period, like power chord. Like all guitarists were only using their E and A string. At that point.
Yes. With a couple of riffs and the clean breakdown section. But that's cool. That's cool. That would have got you playing fast, if nothing else, keeping up with that stuff.
Well, that was it. Actually, I never acclimatized to using a plectrum, and even though I was kind of trying to play punk and everything, all the other bass players I knew were.
Yeah.
And I didn't, and I felt I liked that I was being different and original, but at the time I think I also felt like it, because I was so inaccurate with the plectrum. The reason was I liked jumping around, and when you don't have your hand anchored on your instrument, it makes you less accurate, and I could like just wedge my thumb onto my bass to play fingerstyle, and it meant I could throw myself around as much as possible and still play everything right. So
yeah, cool. That's great. Were you playing a P bass like Mark? I think started off doing?
Yeah, I think everyone. Yeah, I was obsessed with P basses for a while. Like when I finally got into music, I had a Squier P bass, same as everyone else, like an Affinity P bass, which I think I've still got kicking around somewhere.
Nice.
But I think after that, I bought. What were they called? Is it OLP? They were the
Music
first,
Man kind of.
Yeah, the first subsidiary of Music Man, like the cheapy version of that. I had a blue sparkle like Stingray.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, that was cool. That was like the ultimate punk rock guitar, and it started my obsession with like maple fretboards as well.
Okay.
So, yep. So I had a blue sparkle one of those, and I saved up. There's one guitar shop in Watford that was awfully. It was named Hooters. I think it sold brass stuff as well. Yeah, it was terrible. It was terrible. But like I'd been given a Fender bass book for a birthday or something like that, and the front cover had like this really relict 51 P bass, and I was like, oh, that is straight up the coolest thing I've ever seen. But of course, Fender didn't do one. And then, like, maybe a year after that, they introduced the Japanese reissue, the 51 butterscotch P bass.
Yeah, awesome.
But I was what, like 17. I couldn't afford a sort of £700 at the time instrument. And in Hooters, they managed to drop one and knock a tuner off, and which was great. So I managed to buy that display one for £400. And,
beautiful.
That was my favourite bass I think I've ever owned, and I regret selling it.
Wow, that's cool. That's like the Sting model, isn't it? It's got like the.
Oh no, because it was butterscotch instead of sunburst. The Sting models are 54.
Okay.
It has the it's not a slab body, so the 51's completely slab, and you've got all the contours that you actually get on like the 57, which is the 57 is the body shape that we have now on the P bass, but yeah, the contours are the same on the 57 and the 54, but the 51 is like a John Entwistle style slab.
Awesome, man. That's cool. Very cool. So when did your playing experience broaden beyond punk pop kind of stuff?
um, I think sort of yeah, again, like something that I guess I'm not that proud of. Especially after last week on the Guitar Nerds podcast, I was having a pop at them. But yes, I did buy Red Hot Chili Peppers albums. I think that's a natural progression, maybe, if you get into playing. And I think, but that's not what made me progress out of punk. It was that because of listening to Flea, I then found that Flea had played on this other record called Deloused in the Comatorium by the Mars Volta, who are, now the most important band I've ever listened to, and basically everything that I base all my playing and rip everything off of.
Wow.
And so, yeah, listening to Deloused in the Comatorium was the first time I realized I wanted to, to take playing further. I bought a fretless bass shortly after that, an old 1979 Ibanez Roadster with a maple neck that was all the strings had worn into the maple so far that you couldn't do any vibrato because they were almost sitting in the board. But I love that bass, and yeah, I think that's like teaching myself fretless bass is what made me try and progress music further, I think.
Who's the bass player in the Mars Volta?
Well, it depends. They've had loads. The first EP that they put out was Eva Gardner, but because Deloused in the Comatorium was their first album, and that's sort of the benchmark, people forget that Eva Gardner was the first bass player. She was brilliant. She played a P bass, but basically she left to go on tour with, I think, like Pink, or maybe not Pink, but some big pop act.
Okay.
Just as they were recording their records, so they got in Flea, and Flea guest played on that record, but was never the bass player. And after that, they got Juan Aldret, who is, probably the best bass player of all time.
Wow, that's who I'm thinking of. Was he involved in like the 80s shred scene? Was he like on Shrapnel Records? And
he was in Racer X with
that's it. That's who I'm thinking
with
of.
Paul Gilbert.
Awesome.
Yeah. He used to have big hair, and he's got a great range of like instructional bass videos on YouTube that are just really quite bizarre because he has big hair and he's talking about how to play quickly.
Yeah, awesome. That's cool. But yeah, obviously the Mars Volta stuff is killer. Very, very broad as well. Nice. Were you doing any bands? Did you move into any bands, that explored this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I sort of, to be honest, like Polymath was the first one where I actually got to. I've been in a few other bands. Like I stayed in punk bands, and I've been in loads with absolutely atrocious names. And then I think I for a few years I was playing in like a pop band. My girlfriend and a couple of her friends were in a pretty well-to-do like pop indie band. And this is like early 2000s, so around the time that I guess that pop indie, like, sort of indie music with some synths in it was really starting to become popular, certainly over here.
Yep.
And yeah, they had a bass player quit like 3 days before a relatively big show, and she really didn't want me to be in the band because she didn't want to mix the two. But
sure.
They had little choice, and I think they still needed a bass player afterwards. So I ended up in that band for the longest time, probably 3 or 4 years. And that was great for like it was very disco, and that was great for developing like octave bass playing, and all those little double stop octaves, like right hand technique. That's probably the best thing, like the best band I've been in for like developing that style. But ultimately it wasn't especially what I was trying to do. By this point I'd moved down south. I'd gone to university in a little town called Chichester, and which was right next to Brighton, where I now live. And there are so few musicians there that the pop band and this other sort of post-rock band used to kind of share members. They shared like a drummer, and would sort of split members depending on who was gigging where. And it's from those guys that eventually the members of Polymath sort of came about, and how we ended up. We just realised that the three of us really liked the Mars Volta, and decided to jam, and from then, sort of Polymath became.
Is it same three guys? So Tim Walters on guitar.
Yeah, and Chris Willison on drums.
Great.
And yeah, it's always been the same three of us sort of since the start.
Cool. So I was aware of your first recorded output being sort of mid 2013. How long?
Yeah, that's about right. We put out like a slew of like digital singles, but I think 2013 is about when Polymath kind of became. We decided to make it a band. It had I guess a relatively interesting start, because at the time Tim, our guitarist, he's actually a drummer first.
Okay.
And he was drumming in a sort of Sigur Rós style post rock band.
Yep.
Called Monsters Build Mean Robots, and they were doing very well. They were playing the festival circuit, doing a lot of European tours, and Polymath, which then was terribly called Fall of Empires because we couldn't really think of a name, and we were asked to. A slot freed up at the first ever a festival I mentioned earlier, Arctangent. It was the first one, getting all these math bands and post rock bands together in one place in Bristol. And basically a slot freed up a couple of weeks before, and Monsters Build Me Robots were playing it because they were a bigger band, and they knew the guy who ran it, and he was like, "Oh, I've heard you've got a side project. Did you want to fill this slot?" And we didn't have anything. We had like one track recorded. We had no physical CDs. We made like 10 T-shirts, sort of, from our mate who works for a T-shirt company. Sort of, we just turned up really with nothing. We made some little download cards, and we thought, well, we were playing at like 11 in the morning on one of the smaller stages, and we figured no one knows who we are. We've literally done nothing, and it's not going to be, we'll be playing to no one, and that's cool. And we were just, to be honest, just looking forward to the rest of the festival. But some magazine had put out like a 13 things that you must see at Arctangent just before, and they'd somehow found us and included us. And so when we came to play, the tent was like filled out of the tent, which was bizarre.
That's so good.
Yeah, exactly. So for a first show, and we'd only been playing for maybe 6 months at that point. And yeah, before we finished playing, we'd sold all the T-shirts, all the download cards had gone, and we sort of had a chat after that, and we're like, well, maybe we should actually take this seriously and do this as a thing.
Yeah, I'm really interested in how you guys write, because the music is super riffy and super textural. Like, between the three of you, you cover so much ground. How do you guys write stuff? How do you write songs? Do people bring in riffs, or how do you do that?
Yeah, it tends to be that. We sort of, I guess, for the most part, Tim will write stuff at home using on his pedal board and record it into an app, and he'll bring sort of some ideas, and there'll be bits. They won't be tracks. He'll bring in 3 or 4 individual sections, and we'll learn the notes, design a drum beat for it, and then sort of between the three of us, we'll then normally change the time signature, shift it up, start taking the riff apart, and playing part of it, just doing the weirdest things we can with it, and then basically when we build up a few sections, we start trying to knit them together and design other sections that will help us knit them together, and eventually we'll end up with a track, which is kind of why I think we can get carried away, which is why sometimes we can, like the record we've just recorded, like the second song on the record is 18 minutes long, so it's sort of, we can get carried away.
But that's great. You've got all that room to do that. So
Yeah.
I think that's going to be 18 minutes well spent when we get to hear that. That's super cool. One thing that struck me the first time I saw and heard you, because my first experience was watching a video you guys had put together. The music was so visceral. So, you know, I mean, there's obviously a lot of multimeter, time shifting, and these very angular riffs, which is, I guess, in one sense, very brainy. But you're also just laying into them with you know, like a punk rock aggression, which I think combined with the intricacy, which I really loved.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we do try and keep that a bit of a punk rock feel to it as much as we can. I think we're quite different, or I guess everyone thinks that, but I think of us as being different from all the other math bands on the scene. Well, for a start, I don't think we're a math band. We're a prog band that have been lumped in with the math genre because it's the closest thing anyone can think to put us in. But I never think there are enough like just big riffs in math. There's a lot of obsession with intricacy, which is cool, but they can sometimes misplace the intricacy and forget to write something for people to, you know, to dance to, I guess, is the thing. We try and keep our riffs, whilst we want them to be complicated, and yeah, we kind of write for musicians, I guess, in that we want them to be weird and we want people to appreciate that this is a weird time signature or a very unusual note choice. We want that to be the case, but we don't want it to be, you know, we don't want it to be unlistenable as well. It needs to be more than just fast, complicated playing. And I guess that's the aim anyway.
Yeah, cool. Very cool. The up until now, probably the recording I'm most familiar with is Reptiles, which is probably about 18 months old or so now. That was your 6-track EP.
Yeah, that's right.
But you've just finished. Have you finished actually recording the new album, House of Wisdom, We Are the Devil?
Yeah, we have sort of finished recording it. So we finished tracking all the real life instruments. So we did all that over the course of 2 weeks at Brighton Electric Studio, and there are still a couple of bits to do because this is our first like complete concept piece. So this record will tell a story as well. So there's narration and there's a lot of spoken stuff, and also we've got really into binaural recordings and things like that, so, and field recordings. So we've got a whole separate session where we're going to be manipulating all the narration that we'll get and messing up some of the field recordings and then working those into the tracked music and stuff. So we've done things like we got a binaural recording of the sound of the call to prayer outside the Blue Mosque in Marrakesh. This is the most pretentious thing we've ever done, but it's we wanted, because the House of Wisdom is based on the Houses of Wisdom, which were giant libraries in Baghdad in the 12th century, which were kind of the first internet, because they had everything. They had information on like all religions, history, mathematics, and science that was so ahead of where the West was at the time. It was such a progressive city. And in, I think, 1253, Genghis Khan and the Mongolians invaded. They sacked the Houses of Wisdom and they threw all of the manuscripts into the River Tigris. And the reason we got onto this was because I was reading about it, and the sort of story, which obviously probably isn't true, but the story goes that there were so many manuscripts that the the river ran black with ink, and I thought that idea was very poetic and obviously a complete tragedy. So we kind of wanted to make the whole, and I don't think the story's that well known either. So we kind of wanted to tell that story through the music, through sort of themes in what we're playing. And so that hence us wanting to get field recordings of the sound of quarter pair and things like that. Actually, on our Kickstarter, we had one of the things that you could, or not, it wasn't a Kickstarter, it was a pledge, but on our pledge, one of the options you had was to be on the record, and we send out, if you sign up for that, then we send you some script, and you can record that however you want. You could record it on a phone, send it back to us, and then we're going to manipulate all of those bits, and those will be the narrated passages on the record.
Wow, that's cool. Very cool. That's awesome, man. How do you translate some of those stories into musical ideas?
It's there. I mean, that part is quite rudimentary in that we know if we want kind of a pondering section or an aggressive section. That side of it is quite simplistic. We wanted something very raucous and dark and atonal for the part of the story when we're getting towards the sacking of Baghdad, and we wanted, because there was a period where rather than fielding their own army, the caliphate in Baghdad thought that their walls were unconquerable, so they just did nothing. They just left a Mongolian army outside, and we wanted quite a pompous sounding piece for that. So it is as rudimentary as trying to get across some sort of basic idea, and then relying on the narration to actually flesh it out. Nice,
very cool. So what's the timetable from here for the release of the album?
The album's coming out in November. So yeah, I think we're doing a little sort of UK and Europe headline tour. And so I think November 4th, that'll come out. So yeah, we'll see. We sort of gave us this much time because we figured we'd need to release it ourselves rather than going to a label, just because we wanted to put out a double album. It's going to be so expensive to press that when we'd pitch this to some labels who would normally be interested in taking our stuff, they were all, no one had quite said no, but we weren't getting anywhere with anyone because they were all aware of the fact that we wanted this double vinyl with a reversible spine so that you could have a different cover on each side, and the whole thing was so elaborate that no one could really afford, I think, to put the record out. But kind of since the pledge campaign and stuff, and I guess a bit more information's got out there, there have been some labels who are sort of back talking to us again. So I guess we might well not self-release now, but we'll see. So we've got till November to get everything in order anyway.
Okay. That's great. You know, I just love that whether you are backed by a label or not, you've taken on something very ambitious and large. In the digital age, it's so easy to release digital EPs or digital singles, and you guys have obviously done that. But yeah, I think it's really great that you've made a very conscious decision to step it up, and however you're going to release it, you've created the product for that, to that end. That's awesome.
Oh, cheers, man. Yeah. Hopefully, I think that was the idea. We had this discussion because we had good friends of ours who were in bands or on good labels, and they're all telling us like, don't do a double album. Like, this is you're in a good position after Melancholia for if you put out a record, you get picked up by some relatively decent labels, and there have been a couple of bands in our sort of small genre have retired or split up recently. There's room for us, and but we kind of thought, well, if we start doing that, it sort of defeats the point of why we decided to be in a band that just wants to do. The idea is that we're doing whatever we want, and we know that it's pretentious. We know it's ridiculous, and we just want to do it anyway. So we decided to go ahead with the double album, regardless of its definite stupidity.
That's great. No, that's really cool. Really, really cool. And I mean, you guys have been busy, not only putting out the album, but the video promo you guys did for Boss and the MS3. That looked like a cool thing.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, obviously that was through virtue of me doing the Guitar Nerds podcast with Matt Knight, who is the assistant European manager of Boss Marketing. I don't actually know his exact job title, but you know, that was through that. But kind of handy because the guy who's in charge of Matt is a fella called Jamie Dorr, who is obsessed with the Mars Volta.
Okay.
So now that him and Matt are kind of in a position of power in Boss, I think you'll notice a lot of the marketing is going to become more aimed at kind of proggy math, you know, post-rocky musicians, just because that's what they're into. But yeah, that was a really good video. It was a really nice thing to get to do, and I think helped us because we were obviously just about to put a pledge campaign out at the time. The MS3 itself is actually a great product for for bands like us, just because everyone has these ludicrously massive pedal boards. So kind of a high quality switcher with built-in effects. You know, it does actually deal with loads of problems. It was a bit of a trick actually to record the track for that, because Matt got us the MS3 about a week before that we had to record, and it was they were prototypes, and so not all the functions worked on them at that point. And so we were trying to write working around the fact that we could only use so much of it, but it was great in the end.
Yeah, cool. Oh, that's great. So it was obviously used by Boss Europe. I know Boss Australia were using that video as well. So great here. So I don't know, you probably know more than me. Was it used in other territories as well? Like, did it make it to the States or Asia?
Yeah, it did actually. Yeah, it was used in all territories, which was really nice.
That is awesome.
What was good, because of course the way Facebook works, certainly when they share the video on Facebook, I wouldn't see the advert if it was done for Australia, or if it was done for the States. But if someone tags me, if someone tags Polymath, I suddenly can see that thread, and inevitably we ended up being tagged in all of them. And I really enjoyed. I'm a big fan of, because of the nature of my job working for a guitar shop and doing so much YouTube stuff, and being in charge of like social media for it. I'm a big fan of negative comments. I really enjoy reading when people get wound up on the internet about various things. It's fun, and it was fun seeing how different reactions were in different territories. Like, we went down really well in the UK, sort of pretty well in the UK. In Australia was probably the best. Like, the comments were so consistently great.
Okay.
And in America we got an absolute hammering, which was great. But
that's interesting. Wow.
It was funny seeing such different sort of comments on depending on the territory.
Wow. What was the problem in the US with what was their problem, I should say?
They did not like the way we dressed. They had a real problem with our skinny jeans.
Wow.
They didn't like that at all. And,
so not so much the music, but just the.
Yeah. It was all the comments were. Nothing was about the music. But yeah,
that's
bonkers. Just not a fan of the skinny jeans.
Wow. There you go. Okay. Well, maybe that gives you some wardrobe ideas if you tour. Who knows?
Exactly. Yeah. If I'm going over to the States, I know to buy something back here.
Well, that's handy. That's good info. Very cool. I notice you've been using Stonefield basses lately. What's the
Yeah,
story there with you and them?
yeah. Well, Stonefield, I think showed up for the first time. The first time I'd seen them was at the London Bass Guitar Show in 2015, I
Hmm.
think, and I went there obviously like for guitar nerds, and I hooked up with my friend JD who lives in California, and he works for Eden Amplification,
Hmm.
and he was there with his mate Chris, better known as Freak Bass, who is an Eden endorsee, and kind of like a very well known and really great funk bass player, and there was the Stonefield stand was there, and it was huge, and it was this new thing, and they looked they looked incredible, but also I didn't actually try one then because they were so. I went and looked, and they had some bits and bobs out on the stand, and I had a chat and looked at them and stuff, but they looked so beyond what I mean. They're like really premium instruments, so the price point was above what I could afford, and I sort of looked at them being like, this is something amazing that I will never have access to,
Uh-huh.
and we, as it turned out, Chris Freakbase ended up having a chat with Tom Stanley, and that was what started his relationship with them. He now has a signature model made with Stonefield, but it wasn't until, and of course I'm still friends with Chris and stuff, so I'd spoken to him about it, but um, it wasn't until kind of the next year when Stonefield came back, and they managed to get distribution with a UK distributor called Z Music,
Oh,
who
okay. Yep.
also do they also distribute Ormsby
Ormsby.
in
Yeah, I've
Australia.
seen that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Cool.
and because I'm sort of know Perry and stuff, and I'm very much behind the Ormsby brand. I went
Yep.
to sort of see what Zed had, and said, well, like, oh, we actually have Tom Stanley over if you want to meet him, he'll bring some basses and stuff, and he did, and I checked them out, and they were absolutely, they were all completely brilliant. And then I mean, actually, the whole the me me becoming an endorsee for Stonefield came from I contacted Zed a few weeks later when I found out I was going to do this boss video,
Hmm.
and because I'd got on so well with Tom, I was like, look, if you've got a Stonefield in stock, I could play it for the video, and I wasn't that was it. I wasn't trying to get an endorsement. I was
Yep.
just like, I'd like to support the brand because they're great. I didn't, I wasn't looking for an endorsement because the bases are still £4,500.
Uh-huh. Wow.
They're a lot of money. So I was just offering to help, and they put me in touch with Tom Stanley, and he was so good, and he was like, well, how about instead of you playing it this once, you could be the UK ambassador for Stonefield.
Brilliant.
And so yeah, it's kind of all came from there.
So good. They're really interesting bases in that even just down at the bridge end, they've got like a really high tech tailpiece,
Yeah,
and then a wooden bridge.
yeah. This is what I loved these bases because they were kind of designed from the ground up completely differently from anything else I'd
Hmm.
ever seen. I loved that they managed to completely bridge like something so traditional and something so modern. So with the huge tuning system, the Tom Stanley tuning system, as it's known,
Okay. Yep.
um, which is great and insanely accurate and great at like holding your tune. I'd never appreciated that was a thing, and I've never cared about tuners before. Like when people are like this stays in tune, it's like yeah, sure, but on a sweaty stage, you still need to check your tuning
Hmm.
after every song. And it, I didn't, I don't have to anymore, which
Wow.
is great. But it's the floating bridge that was really the thing that a floating wooden bridge was the thing that made me really check out these bases because it means that you can get this really old school kind of what I love about fretless basses, that sort of slow attack sound. You can kind of get that out of the Stonefield, but because it has it has like a mid shift system on it, so it's completely passive, but you've got treble and bass cut on there, so it's kind of set up like an active bass for controls, but it's passive, so you're taking away rather than adding. But you've got a treble and bass cut, and then you've got a mid shift, and you've got 6 different positions on the shift, and then you can pop the bass switch and you get another 6. And they all cut a different range of mids. So it's incredibly versatile in that you can really, really shape a sound, which is great. But it kind of means that I've worked out like a couple of mid positions, which mixed with my compressor and my preamp mean that I can go from this kind of really like old school, because I really like doing this sort of mariachi thing, and I can kind of go from playing those sort of walking bass lines sounding really like low attack and old school, and then like with a flick of a mid shift it can be kind of an aggressive precision bass style instrument, which is killer.
Yeah,
and
awesome.
the necks on the Stonefield basses are that they're bigger than anything else, and they shouldn't be playable. Like they're unbelievably deep and wide, and they give a whole new like meaning to the term like baseball bat neck, and they shouldn't be. It shouldn't work, but it does, and they feel great. The only problem I have now is I had to do a demo video with like a Yamaha BB the other day, and I could barely play it because I'm just so used to this ridiculous neck. And there's nothing wrong with a BB neck; it's normal sized. But it just felt like I was playing a toy.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, they look amazing, those basses, and cool to hear what you're getting up to with them. I like the idea of the mid shifting. That sounds cool. I mean, especially for Polymath, because you're shifting tones so often. Yeah, that's cool to be able to just do it from your bass. Just that mid emphasis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is something that I've not encountered on other instruments. And sure, like a lot of bass players don't even want tone options. You know, if you can get your sound using an amp and just having volume on your bass, that's pretty standard. But
sure.
I have found, I think when I got the bass, because Tom was going to make one for me as well, and when I first got, because my one's a stock one that I'm using at the moment, and when I got it, I figured, well, when I have one made for me, I'll just have a volume control, and I'll get rid of all this circuitry because I'm not going to use it. But as it happens, I use it all the time, so I'd have to now have. Essentially, I would have to just have exactly the same as a stock instrument now.
Yeah, cool. Do you think, Joe, bass players are more adventurous in terms of the type of gear they might end up playing? It seems to me like, bass builders can throw all sorts of crazy things at an instrument, whereas with guitars, there seems to be like either a very vintage camp, even with new builders, or a very modern kind of a camp. It seems like guitar players are not as willing to try out different kind of stuff. What's your take on that?
I don't know. Maybe I would kind of. I almost think it's more down to taste. I think bass players generally, for some reason, are pretty tasteless, and so they yes, it's true. But like to look at guitars, I agree they are in two camps at the moment. You've got the vintage stuff, which is obviously absolutely brilliant. There are some incredible old school things out there, but the modern market at the moment, I think, is the strongest it's ever been for guitar. Like extended range becoming commonplace.
Yeah, sure.
Sort of 8 strings becoming a legitimate thing, and unlike sevens, I always view of like this is just a slight variation on a normal guitar. An 8 string requires a completely different. It's a different instrument, and I love that it's becoming accepted. It's not quite as niche as it always was, and fan fret stuff is becoming huge. Like so, Ormsby being a sort of great example of it, but there are loads of other brands out there making interesting finishes, like stuff like lumen lay dots are becoming commonplace. the modern market is really thinking and designing. Even like Strandberg with their square necks.
Yeah, right, sure.
And stuff like that. And the increase in kind of headless instruments, and I love the way guitar's going at the moment, because I love both banks. Like, my favorite guitar in the world is probably an ES-175, but I love that there's all this great modern stuff that's trying to push players to be better. And that's one thing vintage stuff will never do, because it's not designed around playability; it's designed around vibe. And I love that there's this modern market pushing for it. On the bass side, I kind of think that Fender sort of nailed everything with the precision and the jazz bass, and sort of the modern stuff, I think generally speaking is quite tasteless. Like, I don't like active circuitry, and I've never understood why anyone would want to remove the sound of the wood from their sort of tone. That always struck me as being a bit of a weird one, and so the advancements in bass, I feel, kind of stopped in the 80s, and we're still, that's what we've got. Like, most people now play passive instruments, a 34-inch scale, a Fender style. Like, it's really become about that. And I think, whilst there are some great tiny companies out there, like Franz Bass, like Stonefield, Franz Bass are doing some really interesting stuff at the moment, and like a heap of others, like ACG are doing some great stuff at the moment, and there are all these brilliant companies making modern basses, but they are so boutique. I think a bass player might be, I think you might be right in that. I think a bass player is more inclined to buy a one-off custom instrument than a guitar player. I think guitar players like to have brands on their headstock, and I think bass players want to have something made specifically for them. But I think guitarists are better at being tasteful.
Okay, there you go. Nice. You mentioned earlier a ridiculously big pedal board. I sort of get the idea following you that your pedal board is a work in progress. Like, it seems to be always changing. But if you had for the gigs you've played recently, what's on your board at the moment? What are your must-haves, and what else do you toss in? Say for a Polymath show. Sure.
Well, actually, because I've just got an MS3, I've downsized to a pedal train junior. I was using like a Nove 32 sized board before, but so I have downsized. I'll probably upsize again though. But essentials are, I have to have like a compressor at the start and a preamp at the end of my chain. So at the moment I'm using like the new Boss bass compressor, because it's like a multi-band compressor, and I normally like vintage style compressors. Like, I was using a Bright Onion baking powder, or like an MXR Dynacomp. I really love those, because they over squash everything, and I kind of like that. But recently I've been playing this multi-band. It probably won't forever. I think I will go back to a vintage style, like the MXR Super Comp. I think is one of the cooler sounding compressors, and maybe like the Philosopher's Tone, the Pigtronics Philosopher's Tone. I think that's killer as well. But the preamp I use is a Sansamp VT, which I just use to add like just a little bit of grit before it hits the amp, like an extra gain stage.
Yeah, cool.
But then essentials are, I have to have vibrato, because I use that a lot, which at the moment I'm dealing with through the MS3. And
great.
And then I guess octave and drive, and using them together. So at the moment I use an old Boss OC2, which, like, I put a picture up of one on Instagram, and it, like, a lot of people were saying, I was like, I think this is the best compressor ever, and loads of people were like, it doesn't track. And I was like, well, it's not that it doesn't track, it's more of a sort of subby sound, and it's like, I play it through a bass that's in either D standard or drop A. Like, that's pretty low, and it's fine.
Wow.
So it's kind of, I think they're cool. And then my drives vary. I've been using like one of the Caroline effects. I can't. It's like a Shinuki. Oh, I don't know the name of it. It doesn't say it on the pedal, which doesn't make it easy. But they do a fuzz.
Okay.
But if you sort of mess with the controls, you can kind of get it to sound like a drive. So that's a pretty mainstay at the moment.
Yeah,
and
cool.
phaser, MXR Phase 90. I just love like a slow phase, just always on.
Wow, always.
Well, not always. I wish it was always on, but I have to turn it off occasionally. But yeah.
Cool. Do you with your drive sounds, do you let a bit of clean signal leak through as well? Is the Caroline set up for that?
That is actually something I have been working on. We're switching up our setup at the moment, and because I'll now have the MS3, which allows me to have two outs. I have a stereo out. So what I'm doing now is running my affected signal to my Ashdown ABM 600 going into a big 15-inch cab, and then I'm running a clean signal into a Roland Jazz Chorus, one of the JC40s.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And so I'm using that so that I have this like super, and that will deal with all the high mids, which is what you lose when you stack drives and stuff. And I stack a couple of drives normally, and whilst it's fine, it's so venue dependent and kind of it really can vary. It can end up being so soupy and muddy, and when you're the only other instrument other than a guitar, if Tim's ever not holding down sort of the fundamentals, that those high mids, I really need to operate as a rhythm guitarist as well. And so running into a jazz chorus is kind of the solution. Me and Tim have been hooking up in a rehearsal studio and trying out loads of different amp and effect combinations to try and make everything bigger. The problem that we have is the record that we've just recorded is impossible to play live. So we've got to work out a new way to do it, because we layered up so much stuff. Like most of it has 2 drum kits and like I think we recorded one track, and it took us ages to do it because Pro Tools couldn't quite deal with the 200 guitar tracks that were in one section.
What?
Wow. So it's we're trying to figure out ways to sound like that live now.
There you go, Matt Knight. We need a 200 times guitar pedal that just makes you sound like 200.
Yeah, that's what we need.
That's all you need. That's cool, man. That's great. Man, the more you talk about the record, the more I can't wait to hear it. That's great. So so what happens between now and November and the record coming out for you guys?
We've got to get we've decided to expand the band because of the record. So the record has a lot of organ on it. Chris, our drummer, plays like a Fender Rhodes on most tracks, and it's pretty high in the mix. And there's quite a lot of Mellotron on the record as well.
Okay, cool.
And we also got our friend, another Chris, who runs a studio called Ithaca Audio. We got him in to play saxophone on like a good portion of the record, probably half of the record. And then we'd also set up like a separate percussion kit. And our drummer was there's always like shaker and other bits and bobs going on every track. And we're kind of like, this record's going to sound the live version of this record is going to sound naff if we try and go out and do it with one guitar, one bass, and a drum kit.
Okay.
So we need to get a second percussionist, an organ player, and a sax player for the live show at least.
Okay, cool.
So we're working out who we can get on board. We've got the sax player. We just need to get a percussionist and an organ player on board, and then I guess we'll be performing as the Polymath band rather than Polymath. But,
okay. Yeah, cool. So multiplication, that kind of ties in.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Very, very cool. And are there plans for the tours lined up after the release, or is that still to be?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, November will be the tour. We've got to take it easy to an extent, because actually 2 days from now, I think, is the the due date for Tim, our drummer's baby. So
Oh wow, cool.
so we've sort of got to give him some room to sort of be a dad for a bit before we hit the road
Oh
again.
sure.
So yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing we're most looking forward to is our favorite movie is Three Men and a Baby. So we've already had a friend design a baby grow with the band logo on it, and we're gonna have a photo shoot done that's the same as the cover shot for Three Men and a Baby. It's gonna be great.
We'll look forward to that. Very cool. So Joe, how can people where's the best place for people to find you guys on the net?
We're on Bandcamp if you just want to listen to music, which is we are polymath.bandcamp .com, I think, and we are also on. You can find us on Facebook, which is just / Polymath Band.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess those are the best places. We're website free as it works. We're so DIY, but yeah, those are probably the two best places.
Yeah, cool. And it's Polymath with the dash or the hyphen.
That's right. Yeah, there's a hyphen. So whenever you're searching on like Spotify or Apple Music, very very unfortunately, although we were the first,
Really?
we introduced the hyphen. We introduced the hyphen because there's a Scottish trance DJ also called Polymath.
Oh wow!
Unfortunately, some of his we've been playing festivals, and the festivals have put out like Spotify playlists of the bands on, and they've added this dance track.
Oh no!
From us, so it's So avoid those things.
Yeah, avoid the cheap imitators. I think there's a band in the States also called Polymath, again without the hyphen.
That's right. Yeah, they actually messaged us because they set up quite recently, and they sort of messaged us to sort of say, "Hey, we're actually going to call ourselves Polymath." And I was like, I don't really know what to say. I mean, obviously that's stupid because we've got lots of stuff on the internet, but
yeah,
sure. I sort of got back to them and was like, well, we've kind of got a hyphen anyway, so.
They probably don't have the skinny jeans though, so.
No, exactly.
That's all good. Cool. Well, Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really cool to meet you. Your voice is super familiar because I'm a fan of the Guitar Nerds podcast, but to talk in person's been really, really cool. And
thank you.
Oh man, it's really, really exciting about the new album coming out in November.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm very much looking forward to it. It is the most pretentious thing I've ever done.
Excellent. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Joe. Thanks for being on.
Oh, thanks very much, Matt.
Cheers. All right, there you go, my conversation with Joe Branton. And as I mentioned, really great to meet Joe, having followed his band for a little while now. All right, thanks for joining us. Remember, you can subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher Radio or iHeartRadio or pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts these days. All right, I'm going to get the Polymath boys to take us out. I'm really digging this stuff and totally looking forward to the new record. All right, I'm out of here. My name is Matt Wakeling. You've been listening to the Guitar Speak podcast. See you next time.